Hello, my name is Bryce and welcome to my new channel. Yes, you heard that right. I'm starting a new YouTube channel in 2020. I'm pretty sure there's something wrong with me. But that's beside the point. When I decided I wanted to start a new channel, I was trying to figure out what videos I wanted to post, and I stumbled upon an old list I had made of my top 10 favorite video games. I looked it over, and I realized that if I were to make that list now, a few games would have to be changed. And that gave me an idea. I wanted to go back to some of my favorite games of all time and see how they stack up today, and to see if I still enjoy them as much as I did back then. So that's what I'm doing today. The games in these videos will be in no particular order, but today I'm going to start with Telltale's The Walking Dead Season 1. I originally played this game back in 2013, after all the episodes had been released, and I binged them all in one sitting. Replaying the game after all these years has been interesting, to say the least. Spoiler warning here. I will spoil the entirety of Season 1's story, as well as light spoilers for The Walking Dead TV show and Seasons 2 through 4 of the game. I'd highly recommend you play Season 1 if you haven't already. So, for those of you who have not played the game yet but continue past the spoiler warning, here's a basic overview. The Walking Dead Season 1 is a game developed and published by Telltale Games. It's an episodic adventure game based on the Walking Dead comic series. That means that, much like a season of a TV show, there are multiple episodes per each season, 5 to be exact. Each episode was released individually under the same game, about a month or so from each other. After all the episodes have been released, you could buy the entire game as a whole, like I did. I actually really like this release model for a video game in this style. It adds a unique experience to even the release of the game. If you buy the full game as the episodes are coming out, you get them automatically as DLC when they come out, so you get to experience the story as it's developing. Plus, they throw in a mini trailer at the end of each episode for the next episode to keep you invested. It's a lot like a season of TV you can play, which, seeing as Netflix's Black Mirror Bandersnatch and Markiplier's recent Heist with Markiplier have been hugely successful, it seems that there is a market for this type of thing. Interesting side note I thought I'd throw in because I thought it was cool. In the past, before this game, Telltale, being a smaller publisher at the time, had issues releasing their games at the same time across different platforms. To get around this issue, for The Walking Dead, they designed episodes 2 through 5 as DLC. So for those episodes, they all released the same day for consoles and for PC without issue. The Walking Dead came at an interesting time for Telltale. They had recently released an episodic game based on Back to the Future that found some moderate success, and a few months prior, they had released an episodic game based on Jurassic Park, which did pretty bad. When it was announced that Telltale would be making a game based on The Walking Dead, people were a little unsure about it. They weren't sure if Telltale could make a game that did The Walking Dead's universe justice. Well, they delivered, as the game received critical acclaim, and as of 2013, sold 8.5 million episodes. During development, the game was built with the ending in mind, and ultimately around it. Telltale had a few goals they wanted to achieve with this game. They wanted to make sure that, as a child character, Clementine didn't come off as annoying, while still being the sort of moral compass for the game.
Can I help?
And they wanted the choices to be morally ambiguous, aiming for about a 50-50 split between each choice. So, I want to discuss my feelings on the game, and whether or not I think they achieved their goals successfully. Is Clementine the moral compass of the game? Are the choices morally ambiguous? And does the ending land like they wanted it to? Very quickly, let's talk about the main story of the game. You play as Lee Everett, a convicted murderer who discovers a little girl, Clementine, alone in her treehouse right at the start of the zombie apocalypse. When Lee finds her, he also finds out that her parents died in Savannah, a place pretty far away, through her answering machine. The game follows these two through a few different groups of people as they try and survive through the apocalypse. They meet a lot of different people throughout the story, so let's go through those people now. Let's start by talking about the characters that are introduced in this game, and my thoughts on them. Katja is Kenny's wife, and doesn't get a whole lot of chances to shine. She's okay, but she really functions only as something for Kenny to worry about, and is someone who wants things to go back to the way that they were before. Duck is honestly super annoying, but the game kinda seems aware of that. Honestly, the only part where I kinda liked him was when he was helping Lee solve a mystery in episode 3, but again, he only really serves as something for Kenny to lose. Carly is a character I honestly really enjoyed. I liked how she immediately had Lee's back, and continued to have his back if you kept her alive until episode 3. The romance between her and Lee was a little rushed, but given some more time, I think I would have absolutely bought it. Doug got the shaft in a way I did not enjoy. They spent all of episode 1 talking about how he was a nerd and a dork, and it honestly felt archaic.
Well fucking done, Doug.
All that dark nonsense might save a life.
I couldn't bring myself to want to pick him over Carly in episode 1 for that reason during either playthrough. Lily and Larry are characters I could not care less about. Larry was annoying and abrasive, and all Lily would say is,
"It's just his way."
Lily tried her best to lead the group, but she comes off as bitchy, especially knowing where she ends up. Mark being introduced in episode 2 felt forced, and like he was just introduced so that he could die, and there's not really anything to him. Ben was annoying for the entirety of the game. All he really did was fuck up and not listen to other people. Chuck was cool. I like the idea of a homeless person being in the apocalypse, and seeing if the usual stereotypes associated with that kept up even after it started. My favorite scene with him was when he was giving Lee advice, but honestly, he wasn't in the game for long enough. Krista and Omid are a couple of characters I didn't care for. Krista really doesn't seem to like Lee and how he takes care of Clementine until the very end when they seem buddy-buddy and she's willing to do anything for him. It seemed too abrupt for me. Omid was fine. I like that he was someone who was actually upbeat, but most of his scenes are with Krista, so that kind of brought him down for me a little bit. Molly was introduced for only a short period of time in episode 4, but I enjoyed her story. It tied in well with the story of the episode, and she didn't overstay her welcome. The Stranger is the main villain of the game, and honestly, I enjoyed his motivations. Earlier in the game, there is a car full of supplies that the group steals that belong to him. The lack of supplies as such caused the death of his wife and daughter, at least he says. Then, he ends up talking to Clem on her walkie-talkie, and essentially tries to steal her away from Lee, thinking he's evil and not a good protector for her. And it's at this point I think I need to talk about the elephant in the room. In the beginning, I said this was one of my favorite games, and here I am, shit-talking most of the characters in the game. As I said so far, I've only really liked Carly, Molly, and the Stranger. And that's the truth. This game falls flat in handling most of the side characters in the game. And that's no small problem, where most of the gameplay is talking to side characters. Of the people I've mentioned, most of their dialogue and motivations are either boring or kind of stupid. It really falls into the same trap that most other Walking Dead media does, which is having a revolving cast of characters with a looming threat that any of them could die at any time. And the game makes good on that threat. Of the 12 characters introduced in the first game, only 3 make it till episode 5 in any meaningful way, and not alive off screen. Lee, Clementine, and Kenny. Everyone else dies, leaves, or is introduced after episode 1. Mind you, these episodes aren't exactly long either. Running at about 2 hours apiece, the game totals about 10 hours, maybe a bit more on a slower playthrough. And many of the characters that are introduced after episode 1 either die or end up leaving before episode 5 as well. Mark and Chuck die shortly after they are introduced, and Molly leaves the same episode she arrives. For this game, the main source of drama and tension is character death. Anyone could die at any moment, so you'd better try as hard as you can to keep them alive. But I don't care about most of these characters, and them dying an hour after I meet them isn't exactly helping that issue. I could go on and on about this point for a while, but for me, it boils down to this. I don't think that using death as your only source of drama and tension is a good thing. Death can be an excellent tool in stories, but I think in some stories today, the only way to cause drama is to kill a character, and at this point, it's overused and boring. I might actually make a video about the Walking Dead TV show at some point, because I think that it has this issue to a worse degree, and it's been doing it for nearly a decade. I'm going to save talking about Lee, Clementine, and Kenny for later, but for now I'd like to turn my attention to the gameplay. This game is mostly a point-and-click game with dialogue options during conversations, and that's about it. Sometimes the game makes you move with a single key on the keyboard, and in some locations you can move Lee with Wasad. But it's mostly there for show. Oh, and there are a few quick time events here and there, but again, it's not much. The controls can be a bit clunky and at times distracting, but for the most part, it's serviceable for what they're going for. A story and character-based game where living through the story is more important than the gameplay. And that's the truth of the matter. No one is coming to this game for the gameplay. People play this game to experience an original story that conforms to their choices. And on that note, let's talk about the story and choice in this game. The story is a typical Walking Dead story. It follows a ragtag team of adventurers, many of which don't like each other, as they try and survive the apocalypse. They will stay at a place for a time, but something, whether it's a lack of food, in-party fighting, or an outside attack, or all three, will force them to move. And when they do, they will find a sanctuary that doesn't turn out to be a sanctuary. People will die along the way until they've come to a final new place or destination that they think will be the final solution. Rinse and repeat. In case it wasn't obvious enough, I'm not a huge fan of the actual story here. I like the initial premise. A convicted killer who really isn't a bad guy that finds a little girl alone in the apocalypse and tries to protect her is pretty cool. But everything else beyond that feels stale, even back in 2012. It feels formulaic. Like, even when I played it for the first time all those years ago, I kind of already knew where each plot point was going. Oh, Duck is bitten, he's gonna die, and Kenny's gonna freak. Oh, Chuck held them off for us to escape, he's probably gonna be dead. Oh, the farm people are nice, but they're probably hiding something, and this probably isn't actually a good place to stay. Things like that. A lot of them are cheap, go from point A to point B plot points, and they make sure that horrible things happen. Same goes with most of the choices in this game. Most of them don't actually affect the story, only a very few do. Saving either Carly or Doug will keep the one you save alive until episode 3, saving Ben will keep him alive for episode 5, and many of those choices with Kenny will affect his overall view of you, which affects what happens in episode 5 a bit, but the others don't have any effect, or if they do, it's a tiny effect on dialogue that will happen a little bit later, or maybe change the order of events that happen. Really, this is less of a choose your own adventure game and more of a game where you make choices for choice's sake. That's not to say that these choices aren't fun or engaging. Making a choice, regardless of whether or not it has any effect at all, feels meaningful. The game does a pretty good job of keeping the illusion of choice alive. It worsens on a second playthrough, but on a first playthrough, you often do find yourself wondering how things could have gone if you made a different choice. What if I had saved Doug instead of Carly? What if I would sided with Kenny on this choice? Unless you look it up or know what you're getting going in, it's a powerful experience, especially for those choices that are timed. This is strengthened by the end of episode choice screen. It shows you what choices you made and how you differed from others. While it does break a bit of the illusion by showing that only 5 choices really mattered, it adds to the what if I had done something different vibe. And honestly, that's a pretty cool feeling to give someone in a game. But I don't think that any of this is the point. I don't think that the side characters, or the story, or the choices are the point of this game. All of these are devices that allow the player to experience Lee and his relationship to Kenny, and more importantly, Clementine. In many ways in this regard, The Walking Dead was ahead of its time. While many games like Portal, Uncharted, and Mass Effect had well established and loved characters by 2012, The Walking Dead did something that would become very popular in the years to come. A father figure main character as the protector of a child who would help along the adventure. God of War, The Last of Us, and The Witcher 3, just to name a few, did something very similar to this, and these are considered to be some of the best games ever made. And I think The Walking Dead did it well. Before we get to Clementine, let's talk about Lee and Kenny's relationship. Kenny is one of the few characters whose relationship with Lee can be affected via your choices in-game. As such, to me at least, he automatically has more to offer than the rest of the group. Kenny's story is one of loss and torment, throughout the game losing his wife and son. That part of his story, for me at least, is compelling. In a lot of media, the I'll do anything for my family trope is used for strong men and women, but rarely do those characters fail to protect their family. Kenny is one of those characters, and he fails, and that's interesting. His relationship with Lee becomes that of a best friend. They always have each other's backs, depending on your choices, and they do a lot of stuff together, even some pretty crazy shit. By the end, Kenny sacrifices himself for someone else, kinda, and I think it works a lot better than most of the other characters here, especially since he's been with us since day one. Which again tells me that many of these characters needed time to grow and develop so that their deaths or departures would have some weight. But now it's time to get to the meat and potatoes. Did I really just say that? Clementine and Lee. You may have noticed that I've been mostly negative towards this game up until this point, and I think that's because this game does have a lot of flaws, and it would be dishonest of me not to make a note of them. But Lee and Clementine's relationship is what makes this game good, and at times, great. From the outset, the game takes its time with their relationship. Even when they first meet, you as the player feel responsible for Clementine's safety. The game does something really smart here and makes you make decisions for or about her very quickly. Even if those decisions ultimately don't have any effect on the story, they have an effect on the player. The premise right from the get-go is this: you are now Clementine's protector. And this will affect every decision the player makes as Lee. Whether it's throwing someone out of the group or distributing food, the player needs to think about her. And the game really shines here. The interactions with Clementine are cute, funny, and most importantly, memorable. I vividly remember saving her from that zombie in the market in episode 1. and teaching her how to protect herself on the train, and seeing her play with Duck, and just wishing that things could go back to the way that they were. Clementine kept me immersed in the world the game had presented. And if I'm being honest, she was the only thing keeping that immersion going for me for most of the game. As I said earlier, Telltale wanted Clementine to be the sort of moral compass for the player, and that every decision would be seen by her and affect her. And I think they really did this pretty effectively. After most decisions, a quiet talk with Clementine follows. Sometimes she agrees with you, sometimes she doesn't, and sometimes she just doesn't understand. But through all of these, you are confronted with the choices you make, reinforcing them for better or for worse. And these interactions never get too repetitive or drawn out. If anything, the game doesn't have enough moments between the two of them. On my second playthrough, I found myself wishing there were more moments between Lee and Clementine, especially while I was interacting with the side characters I just didn't care about. But after thinking about it some more, those side characters were necessary. I don't think the story and bond between these two would have worked as well if it had been down the same vein as, say, God of War, where mostly it's just Kratos and Atreus on an adventure together. Often the gameplay story loop is talk with Clementine, convene with the adults of the group to make some sort of decision, try and make a good one for you and Clem, and then talk to her about it. And it's that part where you make decisions for both of them, separate from her. That wouldn't work without the side characters. I feel it would be remiss if I didn't mention Lee as a character by himself. To start, Dave Fennoy does a fantastic job as the voice actor for Lee.
I'm, not her dad. Name's Lee. I killed someone. Different than Larry or the St. John's. Different from everything. This was before the Walkers.
Being the player character, he's going to do most of the talking in the game, and his voice is a treat to hear every time as Lee. Ultimately, the Lee that you get in your playthrough will be shaped slightly by the dialogue choices you make, but you'll always find a kind-hearted man with a dark past who's just trying to do the best that he can. And while this isn't exactly groundbreaking, it's enough for the story being told. I think his character is handled well. His backstory of killing his cheating wife is played up just the correct amount, never too much to where it gets boring, but to a fun extent that gives Lee and the player worry.
You, Lee Everett. That's right. I know who you are, and I know you're a killer.
Him having to explain to Clementine that he isn't a bad person, but that he also killed someone before the outbreak, is one of my favorite moments in the game. Besides all this, though, Lee rarely exists in a vacuum, for better and for worse. He's always shaped by the people around him. Most of the time it's Clementine, but sometimes it's the others. I want to take a moment to talk about the 5th episode of the game. Episode 5 is easily the best episode of the game by far. And for that reason, if you stuck this far through the video and haven't played the game yet, this is a second spoiler warning. I've avoided spoilers for episode 5 for the most part, and I think it alone is worth your time investment for the game and is best played blind. At the end of episode 4, Clementine is missing and Lee, in an attempt to find her, gets surprised and bitten by a zombie. Almost everyone knows what happens when you get bit by a zombie, but having the main player character get bit is one of the smartest things I've ever seen done in the game. Well, first you think, well, there's no way they're going to kill off Lee, so how are they going to get themselves out of this one? The reason most people will think that is that killing off a main player character is so rare in games that I can't even think of any other games that do it. And the manner of this death is so unique to The Walking Dead's universe that it's brilliant. Because in some other games or media where the main character does die, it's almost always in some dramatic sacrifice to save people. Not here. This is a slow, drawn-out death where, for an entire episode, almost a fifth of the runtime, you know you're going to die. But that doesn't matter. None of this matters. Clementine is missing, and you are a man on a mission, and you need to save her. And now you have a timetable. It is so fucking good that I'm honestly surprised it was green lit, because ultimately, this entire plotline is a risk. This is all set up in the first 4 episodes. While I think that perhaps they are more boring and plain, the relationships built in those episodes lay the groundwork for this episode. Episode 5 would not have worked on its own. You get to make a few choices in this episode that don't really matter, like many of the others. One such choice is the choice to cut off your arm. For this choice, I actually like that your choice doesn't matter, because in some cases in life, you make decisions that don't ultimately matter, and you don't know that at the time. If I cut my arm off, I might live, or even live a few hours longer, and have more time to save Clem, is a fucking brilliant question to make your players ponder, even if your choice doesn't matter in the end. They don't know that on the first playthrough. Slowly, throughout this episode, Lee gets worse and worse, and you know what's coming, but you find yourself not believing it. As I was playing it, I found myself not believing it. Because how can you? In stories, there are so many main character death fake-outs, That this one, so in the face of the player, it seems, well, impossible to follow through with. But it's not impossible, and that's what makes it so great. Lee continues on throughout the entire episode, getting weaker and weaker, until ultimately he finds Clementine and the stranger. Once more, before the end, he must face his past and the questions the stranger gives him, and it's pretty powerful. Clementine, in a reverse of fate, saves Lee, and they escape together. And now we come to the end. The ending of this game is the reason this game is one of my favorite games of all time. Lee passes out, and Clementine has to save Lee again. Moments before, Clem saw her zombified parents in a crowd of zombies. Lee wakes up to a panicked Clem, but he's too weak to move. He coaches her through getting out and essentially passes the torch to her. She has to take care of herself now, because Lee is dying. Soon. Lee and Clementine exchange their emotional last words and goodbyes, and the player is presented with one last choice. Ask Clementine, the little girl you've been protecting this entire game, to either shoot you so you don't turn, or to leave you behind.
I'll miss you.
Me too.
This moment is the only time a video game has ever made me cry. And not just a few tears, I'm talking ugly cry. And that's how you can tell that two characters and their relationship were well executed. So where does this leave us? Well, The Walking Dead is a game with a lot of flaws. The choices rarely matter, the story is a bit bland, and the side characters are boring and annoying. But the game goes beyond these flaws to bring to life one of the best character relationships in all of gaming, and created one of the most emotional endings in all of gaming that has stuck with me since the day I played it. To me, that's enough to warrant a play. And I think it's proof that sometimes character is enough to surpass gameplay. Thank you for watching. This outro isn't scripted. I just wanted to say thank you for watching if you took the time to fully watch it through. I know that there are a lot of mistakes and stuff I could have done better. I'm learning. These kind of videos, they're a special type of challenge to make, and so I think I could have probably sat here and worked on this thing for a year and try to make it perfect, but then it would never come out. So I kind of want to move on and make new things. So, constructive criticism is always welcome. Let me know what you think I could do better, what I did good, other things. Leave it in the comments below. If you enjoyed, maybe consider subscribing. I plan on making more videos on this channel in the future. So, if you want to subscribe or hit that bell, I think is something that people do now. That'd be cool. I think the next video I'll make is probably the Modern Warfare video or the Last of Us video. I started making this video actually in November, and so that took me pretty long, and I want to get the Last of Us video out before the Last of Us 2 comes out. So that might be next, depending on how my work ethic is. I'm doing these mostly just for fun, so I'm not making any money off of these, and so, yeah. Let me know what you think. There's nothing else like that. If you have any questions, leave it in the comments. I'll try to answer as many as possible, and hopefully you guys enjoyed. Let me know if you guys like The Walking Dead, Telltale's Walking Dead. If you don't like it, why don't you like it? I love the game. Playing through it again was a treat. So, yeah, without further ado, I will talk to you guys later. Have a good one.